All right, aloha everyone. Hello, this is Ryan Nakata here, and today I'm really happy and incredibly honored to be talking with my dear friend Karen Voorhees. So, Karen, how are you today?
I am great, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I am recovering
Hey.
from a cold, so you can probably hear it in my voice, and I may have some sniffles and coughs here and there, but hopefully it'll work out for this conversation. And we just a little background about our relationship. We met on the Integral Life Forum, where you had posted very briefly about your inspiration to write a integral novel and hopefully best-selling book.
Oh yeah, I'm aiming high.
Aim, shoot for the moon or for the stars. And and we met in Portland when you came and visited over Thanksgiving.
Yeah,
We had
that
a
was great.
enlightening and enlivening conversation about all sorts of different things. So I am thrilled to have you here today, and I'm really excited to jump into talking about all these different things and your novel and your book. So I thought we could begin if you shared a little bit about yourself and your life, and maybe some of the salient points of your life that led to your inspiration in wanting to write this book.
Well, okay. I am a Tolkien fan from way back. I was 15 when Lord of the Rings was published, and being a humanities nerd, I said to myself, this is more than just another pretty story. So I ended up becoming a medievalist
Hmm.
in college, in love with the Middle Ages. I was in love with scholarship. To me, academic scholarship, scholarly truth was the highest form of truth I could cognize
Hmm.
at the time. I got a fellowship to go off and do my PhD dissertation research in Munich, Germany, because I was doing medieval manuscripts, and they have a lot more of them over in Europe than we didn't really have a Middle Ages here. All the medieval manuscripts are in Europe. So as I was studying, I met my spiritual teacher, Takar Singh, and found my spiritual path, Sant Mat, and I started meditating very seriously and discovered that, and this is where I plug right into Ken Wilber and his whole view of integral. There are levels of truth and reality and understanding way beyond the intellectual. It was like new dimensions opened to me when I started meditating. And I kind of wondered, why am I wasting my time on academia when a truth with a capital T is like dimensions beyond the intellect?
Hmm.
So that whole world opened to me. And so I figured, well, I'll become a college prof. Girls got to earn an honest living. That's what I knew how to do. But then I met a really nice guy and married him and was gleefully bailed out of academia, which I was glad to do for other reasons. Deconstructionism was beginning its hostile takeover of the humanities around then.
Hmm.
So it was kind of a good place to bail out of for those of us who believe in higher truth, right? And so I've made a living mostly being a doctor's wife, not what a 70s feminist had expected to do. One of many surprises in my life, but I have been, over the decades, I have done a lot of things, volunteer mostly, including helping with my spiritual organization, doing a lot of end-of-life care for parents and other aging relatives. And I kind of got hit upside the head with the drive to write this story. Um, it's kind of a long version how I came to write it. I've got an essay, maybe I'll post. But the story landed on me about 28 years ago. Stone Age priestess helping her people in the first transition from foraging to farming 11,000 years ago. And I kind of put it on the back burner for a while. And then about 4 years ago, it hit me upside the head again. And I thought, I've got, just like this inner need, I've got to write this. I analyzed the bad guy in the novel, the guy who drives the action, on 3 psychometric axes. And about 75 pages into the first draft of my novel, Donald Trump sailed down that escalator, announced his candidacy for president, and I looked at him and said, "Holy Toledo." Only I didn't use the word Toledo. I'm not sure if you do Anglo-Saxon 4-letter words here or not, so I'll be polite. I said, Trump's the bad guy in my novel. He matches the bad guy on all three psychometric axes, and he plays the same role in the political life of the community. And he kind of drives my heroine, who dies very dramatically as a human sacrifice. But he kind of drives the whole drama. And this is the great transition, one of the great transitions of era, from foraging, people had only ever been hunter-gatherers, and this farming thing, this is this brand new technology that's upending everything, and it's changing everything, and people are scared. And I had 28 years ago when this story landed on me, I was kind of seeing, okay, this is the dynamic. And now here we are. We're in this change of era now, massive change of era. The seventh massive change of era Homo sapiens has gone through. We've been through 6 changes of era before this one. I'm a historian. I got my PhD in cultural history. And I'm looking at this as a historian. And I'm seeing that we are in this era of massive, massive change. A whole new era is being born on Earth, driven by technology, among other things. And this is this novel, this story that landed on me 28 years ago, that I have been spending the last 3 years of my life working on. And so I'm feeling this incredible drive to get the story out there, because this is really a story about what we're going through now. It makes sense of what we're going through. I mean, it all makes such sense to me from a larger historical perspective. And I see so much distress and despair around me. I think, you know, Homo sapiens has been through this before. We've seen this movie 6 times before, a change of era from one era to the next new era. We go through this phase change of incredible turmoil and volatility, and then the next new era emerges that nobody could have predicted the exact features of it. But this is my big push. This is what's the fire in my belly that's driving my creative writing, to present a story that's a really groovy, fun story that lots of people want to read because there's lots of sex and violence and all that good stuff. But hopefully the more discerning readers will see the larger pattern that makes sense of what we're going through right now today in a way that helps us make good policy decisions, you know, rather than bad ones, that help mitigate the suffering of this period of volatility. And I have such a vision of hope for our future in the larger run. Things may get worse before they get better, but we have a beautiful future ahead of us. And this is like, I feel like it's bursting out of me, and I want to share it. Okay.
Yeah, I feel the inspiration too, for you to want to kind of help to birth this future that we have the potential of moving into. But something you said was, I find really fascinating, and just so I understand you correctly, you had had the idea of the story for 28 years.
Yeah.
Now, the villain in your story was his idea, the idea of your villain, that was that also created 28 years ago, and then so it kind of anticipated Donald Trump?
Yes. Okay, I will come clean. It landed the first. I mean, I've been doing a lot of meditating, and weird things happen when you do a lot of meditating. I mean, I was trying to do a Jungian technique. This is what, 1994, 92, 94, around there, to resolve a persistent mood that's bothersome. So I tried this Jungian technique, which you're not supposed to do by yourself, but you know, I did it. I'm arrogant. I thought, I can handle it. What landed on me felt like a past life recall, which was not at all what I was prepared for. I mean, it was intense. I mean, it was like a 20th of a second. Like, you know, back in the days when we had single lens reflex cameras where the shutter opens and shuts and lets the image through. It was like a 20th of a second where I saw the whole life. Actually, what I saw was her. I mean, I saw her visually in a vision, a 20th of a second, and the whole life story landed on me. And I spent the next 3 days shaking in a corner of my house, unpacking the story. Basically, wherever I put my attention, just the knowledge would come flooding in. I mean, it wasn't something I was making up. It was something that was like landing on me. And so I wrote up a 5-page outline. So at that point, my heroine, Mbe, she's the first ever high priestess. They had priests and priestesses, but she was the high priestess. And then her nemesis, Batumavir, who was the first warlord, a sort of a proto-warlord, and then her supernatural mentor. Those 3 were part of the story, and their names came with it. And the whole story arc, about a 5-page worth of story arc that I wrote down later. But for that period of actually a number of weeks and months, if I put my attention on any aspect, it would just kind of like blossom in my mind. It was all there. Now, then I just put it aside, and I actually in 1994, I set out to write it as a novel, and then other things came up in my life, and I put that aside. But then three and a half years ago, when I retired from some of my other involvements, I thought, well, what am I going to do now? As a retiree, a girl can only do so many crossword puzzles and Sudokus. Maybe I'll write that story about Mbe. That would be a fun project. And at this point, it's like it's landing on me again. And then when Donald Trump sailed down that escalator and announced his candidacy, I said, OMG, what am I in the middle of? And I have to say, Ryan, I have had more synchronicities in the last 3 years since I started writing this novel than I've had in my entire life previously. It's like they just keep landing on me. Little ones constantly, big ones occasionally. It's like whatever else, the universe wants me to be doing this. So
yeah, definitely.
Well, that's where you were aiming for, but that's where this went.
Right. Yeah.
So yes, the good guy, the bad guy, enter supernatural mentor. These three characters were definitely absolutely core. To the whole thing.
Yeah. So I'm curious. I don't know how much of the plot or anything you want to share, but I guess the question I'll just put out there is, can you tell us a little bit about what is how your novel reflects the cultural shift we're going through at this time, and what is the future that you see us moving into, or at least what you would like to see us move into, and how will this novel maybe help bridge that gap?
Let's start with where it's moving into is the next step up. Well, this is big. In fact, I was preparing for this interview with you by rereading one of my essays. The Dying Priestess has a vision of her people's future, which is a condensation. It's kind of the punchline of the novel. The payload on the rocket launch that is my novel is a vision up the ages of the future. And it's really seeing all of our past eras from a Stone Age priestess's point of view, from the Stone Age point of view. Well, the next era is agriculture, and she saw the beginnings of that. But the gods grant her a vision, at the climax of the novel. It's a story, it's fiction. But I use that to take her up through, briefly, her vision of the ages to come up to our current postmodern, which is the sixth, as I parse history, it is the sixth major era in human history. And then I take us into the seventh. So that's the punchline of the novel, basically. And again, I hope it's just a groovy novel with a paranormal horror and supernatural thrillers and sex and violence. Of course, you got to have that, or it's not a fun story. And, this was 11,000 years ago, so it really belongs.
Right.
But the payload is to deliver this vision, kind of where we were. And if anybody who reads this will hopefully have a real sense of just what life really was like 11,000 years ago. I mean, olive oil, incredibly precious. How much work it takes to pick the olives, and you don't just pick them and eat them, you have to cure them. And it's a lot of work over months to get them to leach out the bitterness and cure them. And then you have to press them and grind them and filter them, and just how many hours of human effort it takes to make a handful of olive oil. This is an incredibly precious substance. I mean, they're just starting to grow linen. They've got dogs. They've had dogs a long time. They're just starting to raise pigs. They don't yet have sheep or goats or any other animal. I mean, just the brutal realities of life. What it takes to keep yourself free of lice and fleas. So the reader will have a sense of what life really was like, and then how we've come up the ages, the age of agriculture, polytheism, the age of the great religions. Now we have great cities, ancient Roman Empire, come up through the Middle Ages, up from the early modern era to the present. So the reader will, I hope, have a sense, even if they know nothing about history, they will have a visceral sense of just how far we've come, what we have come through, what we have survived, what we have thrived through, how far we have come. I mean, just to take that step back and get that perspective, how far we've come. And here I want to push my favorite columnist in the New York Times, Nicholas Kristof. He's a regular columnist for the New York Times. He just wrote his first of the year column. He does this every year, where he says, this last year was the best time ever to be Homo sapiens on Earth. Mm. And he spends the rest of the year covering how horribly things are going wrong for certain people. He's a great social activist. But let's look at the bigger picture. Look what life used to be like 500 years ago before we had antibiotics. You know, yes, we abused them, but, you know, look how short average lifespans used to be. I mean, in the Middle Ages, people used to die of tooth abscesses. That was the number one cause of death in the Middle Ages, a tooth abscess that got infected and went to the brain. I mean, ow. We don't worry about that stuff. I'm getting into the weeds here, but just how far we've come. So any reader of this novel will have a visceral sense of where we've been, where we are now, where we can go next.
Yes.
And that's thrilling. And I do put a little bit of that in the novel, just enough, I hope, to be exciting. But one of the personal visions I have, and I had this kind of when I was, well, long story, I'll loop to the punchline. I imagine cities, the great cities, the center of the cities, our cities in your lifetime, maybe mine, will become as beautiful as forests. They will be beautiful forests. We're going to grow our buildings like trees grow. We're going to learn enough about how trees and other plants grow that we will grow our buildings. Our cities will be the central skyscraping parts will be thousands of feet high. There'll be vast, vast, vast trees. Think Lothlorien, like in Tolkien's, you know, the elves who live in the forest, they actually have the vast trees. They have their cities in the trees. The skyscrapers will be vast trees. They will be incredible parklands. You know, they'll buttress each other. The branches will interweave. We've already seen a little foretaste of that in that kind of tree park in Singapore. That's just a beginning. Or that Salesforce building in San Francisco. Our cities will be beautiful forests. They will be parks. We will have vertical farms. We will have living walls. We will harness wind and sun. We can draw, I mean, we'll plant a lot more forests, but we will be drawing carbon dioxide out of the air to the degree we want to. We will be fine-tuning it. I mean, you just look at the technology now, and there are books about this. You can read, Diamandis. Anyway, there's a lot of the technology that most of it which is over my head, but even the stuff that we know now is so thrilling. The pieces we have for this glorious future are there already. We need to put some of the pieces. The hardest part is political, right? Mm-hmm. As Einstein said, politics is harder than physics.
Well, interesting. I haven't heard that.
Pardon?
I haven't heard that one from him. That's interesting.
Yeah. Politics is harder than physics. Making wise policy is the hardest part. I look around at the world and I see all the pieces we need for that beautiful future that I can see. I mean, I can see in a little bit of detail. You know, the only thing lacking is our awareness that it's possible and that enough of us care and that we make some wise policy. I mean, it's going to come about sooner or later, but these periods of transition between era are always rocky and volatile. In physics, you've got phase changes, right? In biology, you've got punctuated equilibrium. Right? This is our parallel in human societies. We're going through a phase change, one of the punctuation points in the punctuated equilibrium of evolution. Let's make this, this is my passion that's driving this. Let's mitigate the suffering this time. Are we wise enough? We are looking at the human parts of this, the 6 eras of human society. The dark ages in between the major eras have been periods of great upheaval, great suffering. Every one of them has evolved up to a new level, not just of material culture, but of consciousness. This is Ken Wilber's brilliance here. He put this together for us in Up from Eden. That the levels of human civilization match exactly with Piaget's level of cognitive development. Each level up is a much more powerful way of understanding the world. in the process of pushing up another level, another even more powerful way of understanding ourselves and the world, states of consciousness, states of cognitive sophistication, understandings of science. We're beginning to realize that we have cognitive biases. How about that? And we can, but the fact that we know this consciously and we can define them scientifically means we can adjust for them. We are wiser at every level up we get. We can be. We have the potential to be wiser. Are we wise enough this time through to mitigate the suffering instead of just being inundated by it? I'm excited. See, I think we can mitigate the suffering. And that's I mean, with the larger context, understanding the larger context, so we can make wise policy choices. Can we mitigate the suffering? I'd like to do that. I mean, we're going to get there regardless, but let's do it with less suffering rather than more.
That would be ideal.
It'd be awesome.
and I don't know if you've experienced, I'm sure you've noticed this to a degree, but just being out in society and out and about in Portland, Oregon, or Hawaii or wherever, I really do sense almost very viscerally that a lot of people have this longing for what's next, what is the next step. But
yes.
I think a lot of the average person, maybe in a conventional or even postmodern type of environment, they don't really know anything about integral theory, or they're not necessarily spiritual on an explicit level.
Mm-hmm.
But there is still that longing of something right now is just not working. And I can't put my finger on exactly what that is, but there is definitely a deep yearning for,
yes,
let's forge ahead, let's push on through,
yes,
and go to the next level. And I'm curious, excuse me, I'm curious about how you see your book having this kind of transformative impact on someone's consciousness. So let's just say that, I'm an average guy, right? And I maybe just walk into a bookstore and say, oh, this looks interesting, maybe I'll have some sex and violence in here. I pick up your book and I read it. And how do you think that this kind of novel, with a kind of an implicitly integral or just a higher consciousness message embedded in the structure of the story, how do you envisage that having a transformative effect on the average person's consciousness?
Well, that's a complicated question. Mm-hmm. I hope it will. I mean, mostly I hope people just enjoy the story. I mean, she had a really interesting life, and it's a great story. But she was trained to be a shaman, so she was trained to be out of her body, what we would call the astral body. I mean, this is part of that old wisdom that a lot of people are trying to revive right now, that there are subtle energies. We do exist outside our physical bodies. So I'm just shoving all of that in there as I understand it. And if people want to take it as a groovy fantasy, beautiful. I mean, the deeper moral messages will come through regardless. So what I'm envisioning is kind of a spectrum, and people can dial wherever they are most comfortable. Okay, well, this is the deeper moral message, but this stuff is all fantasy. It's a work of fantasy, right? So wherever people want to play with their comfort zone, oh, well, this is just fantasy, paranormal horror, groovy. Wow, that's fun. Everybody likes a good horror movie, and look how popular Stephen King is. There is some paranormal horror in here, fair amount. There is some great spiritual openings, fictionalized. So I'm hoping that every reader can find their comfort zone, and the people who want to go for the deeper insights are not the whammy visionary stuff anyway. They are what good old-fashioned term, moral fiber. The deep morality, and these are things that a lot of the Buddhists, the Buddhist traditions that are blossoming now in the West, these are not great whammy hallucinatory experiences. These are deep things like compassion, loving kindness, mindfulness, being present right now, accepting every moment as what it is without resisting. I mean, in my heroine's context, this would be accepting every moment as the will of God's and saying, God's, what do you will for me now? Please let this serve your will. This would be her mindset. But I hope the modern reader will just see that this is I'm smuggling it in for those who want to see. People who just want a groovy story, that's great. This is a groovy story. But then those deeper things are part of the deeper structure for those who look at it at the deeper levels. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's absolutely brilliant. And, you know, it really reminds me of the old tactics used by people like a Jesus or a Buddha of having these allegorical stories with a lot of layers to them, right? And so if you just want a story then and be entertained by that, then that's great. If you want to extract a deeper message out of that, that can be very transformative. So I love how you package it all in there. Another thing
I can pull it off.
Yeah, it's quite an ordeal.
It is, but I've been reading Ken Wilber for 30 to how many years? I think I started when he'd only published 3 books, and I've been basically reading his books as they've come out. So the deep structure of this novel is integral. Ken Wilber's integral, because that is the deep structure of how I understand everything. It totally parallels my spiritual life and my spiritual journey. Ken Wilber has done such a terrific job of defining how all of it fits together. And so I have rested a great deal on what he's done. And the thing is, though, and this is something, one of the critiques that comes up about the whole integral community is that it's kind of a closed shop with its own jargon. And, you know, you and I, like talking with Teal, we know what that means. I mean, and I love the word talking with Teal. That can mean anything. It's a beautiful title. But as you go on to talk to other people who followed Ken Wilber, you're talking this lingo that we understand. And how do you take that out into a larger circle? How do you take that out how do you take integral mainstream? So one of my modest ambitions with this novel is to take integral mainstream.
Yes.
And just give people a visceral, you know, simply, you don't need to know all that fancy schmancy terminology. You just have a visceral feel for it. That's what I hope. Yeah,
beautiful. I mean, that really is, I think, the great question. And really, I think the next step for us as integral practitioners is to find ways to bring it out into the mainstream and to embed it into the culture, you know, whether it's through a story or through, as we talked about before, through like a video game or something.
Yeah, a video game. I mean, I could really imagine a whole role-playing world that is based on integral, because that's the cultures. You know, you've got the barbarian, you've got the crusader, the paladin, you've got, you know, the courtesan, you've got all these people, and they fit into these particular slots.
Right.
An awesome way to structure a fantasy role-playing world.
Right. Totally. Absolutely. And yeah, I love the whole mission and angle. And what also interests me about your book is it seems like you're also incorporating multiple genres, right? You mentioned it has a spiritually uplifting theme. It was a
paranormal horror.
Yeah, paranormal horror. Yeah. And I love how you're drawing from a lot of elements, and I think that'll really help to make it available to a wide audience.
Yeah. I'm also getting a steamy women's romance in there.
Perfect. Hey, you know.
Yeah.
Gotta throw that in there. I'm super excited to read it and just to so I'm really looking forward to that. One of the things that came up for me when you're talking about your character, and one of the things she does in this book, is to give a critique, maybe a very even acerbic and sardonic critique of the stages of development that had arisen, and she's giving that critique from a place of 12,000 and some years ago. And I just, the thing I think what I'm looking forward to the most in reading that is what your character would have to say about postmodernism from that ancient perspective. I'm sure there's a lot there.
Yeah, and this is only hinted. I mean, in the novel, the vision it's condensed. It's a few pages necessarily, because, you know, that's, but so she won't really have a critique of postmodern, but what I think is going to be packed into the novel is the shadow side. Every one of these eras has a shadow side, and this is very Hegelian, Hegel's view of history. Thesis, antithesis, and then there's a synthesis. So you have, once you hit your next new level, And things are ticking right along. Look at all this new technology. Look at with farming. Look, we can grow all this grain. We can feed so many people. We've got towns. We've got cities. Well, now in the crowded cities, you know, you don't just burn down your bark hut when there are too many fleas and rebuild a quarter of a mile away. What are you going to do about fleas and lice? And how do you persuade everybody to go out and poop in the fields instead of in the streets? And, you know, we've got the problems, the unpredictable problems of the next new level start to build up, and they create a synthesis. An antithesis. And then as the dark side, the shadow side builds up, increasingly clash, then there's a period of great turmoil and the old systems break down. Then yet another new synthesis emerges, the next level up. And she sort of tracks this very briefly at every level. There's a shadow side of every new level, and that creates an antithesis. For instance, we've had this back and forth all through Western culture between democracy and authoritarianism. We've had it since ancient Athens. We're going through it right now, going through another one of these rounds of back and forth. Where the problems of democracy end up getting wobbly, and then people get scared and they want a strong man who because he'll promise them he'll take care of everything. We've seen this so many times before in history. And as the clash arises, that pushes evolution. So I'm going to go back to an abstract principle. Extreme environmental stress is one of the things that drives physical evolution, biological evolution. When things are going well, you don't need to change. You just go ticking along the way you always have. It's comfortable. It's extreme environmental stress, like tidal zones, that pushes evolution, right? When you and your society or your species are under such stress that the weakest among you are dying, and the ones who are best adapted to whatever the changing circumstances is create the next, Extreme stress drives evolution. This is the sad truth. Now, as human beings, once we get up to the point of being mammals, certainly we start to experience that as suffering. I'm wandering from the point you asked, but I'll complete this and then try to come back. I'm wondering, this is my radical ideas about the future, and I cannot blame this on Ken Wilber or my spiritual teacher or anyone else, is our next level of consciousness, of evolution of consciousness, going to take us to a place where we can continue evolution without the suffering. I'm going to break free in a completely different direction. Homo sapiens is now evolution on planet Earth. We are evolution. It's not something that just happens to us anymore. Up until now, evolution has just happened to us. We are evolution now, and it's genetic engineering, this new CRISPR technology they've come out with that I don't understand. Look at the way we have inserted ourselves into all of the biological processes on this planet. I mean, what we do determines evolution, not just for Homo sapiens, for all life on the planet, even for the rocks and the climate. We better get wise very fast. This is Stuart Brand, one of my heroes. He came out with the Whole Earth Catalog back in my hippie youth. He said back in late 60s, I think it was, we are as gods, we might as well get good at it. Now he's saying, we are gods, we better get good at it. Well, it's in our face now. We better get good at it or else. But look at what the possibilities are as we pursue our spiritual growth and our growth in consciousness, and especially the Buddhists, the kindness, the compassion, the deep insight, the wisdom, the opening to higher states of consciousness. Can we become wise enough that evolution happens out of love for truth, out of love and wisdom, rather than being driven by suffering? Is this a phase we're entering? I mean, that's one of the things I see looming. We're at a stage, Ryan, where the next new era on Earth is happening within a human lifetime. The way I parse history is the last major change of era was from modern to postmodern. The hinge, the period of volatility, the phase change, as I parse history, was World War I, the Depression, World War II. Coming out of World War II, we had a whole new world order. The Bretton Woods, the whole United Nations, the European Union post going beyond, evolving beyond the sovereign nation state. I mean, I'll pull back, or I could easily get into the weeds here. I mean, but the whole new era, postmodern, really came online during my lifetime. I'm 67. I'm just about to turn 67. I was a hippie chick. I mean, the whole age of Aquarius, that was when the postmodern era kind of came online as a community. You know, that was Ken Wilber's tipping point, when 5 to 10% of the people are at that level. That becomes the defining culture, the leading edge of culture. That came online in my lifetime. And now in my lifetime, I'm seeing the transition to the next. As you go back in history, and I have charted this, I have a chart of this, it's an Excel spreadsheet. So you go back in time, every major transition takes an order of magnitude less time. I mean, that's not very well said. The length of time from one major transition to the next, each next one happens an order of magnitude sooner than the one before it. Mm-hmm. And you can take this back to the Big Bang, you know, starting with the Big Bang. Right. And you can find, and you can tweak this, you can cherry pick it. That basically, if you define every major change, starting with the Big Bang, then the establishment of stars, then you have stars making enough heavier elements to have planets and planetary systems. Every major change where you need a new science to study it. First you need physics, then you need chemistry, then you need geology and meteorology and so on. And then you get into human society, and then there are 6 of those in human society. I mean, you can chart this. They're really major changes where you need a whole new science to study the next new emergent level of complexity. Biological life, I mean, multicellular life, mammals, you know, however you want to parse it. Every one of those major changes happens an order of magnitude sooner than the one before it. We have now reached a place where these major changes are happening within a human lifetime. It's like 70 years, let's say. Mm-hmm. I mean, Ryan, you are, I don't want to scare you. I think this is wonderful that you guys are living in a world where these are just going to speed up, so that, I mean, you're going to have multiple ones in your lifetimes. You guys are going to be augmenting, I mean, you are becoming post-Homo sapiens, transhuman. We have already begun augmenting ourselves with our devices. We're going to be running, our devices off our brainwaves before much longer, probably even in my life, certainly in yours. AI is not going to replace us. And here's, boy, I'm really wandering all over the place. Sorry.
Yeah, please keep going.
See, here's where I differ from Kurzweil. Mm-hmm. With the singularity, AI is not going to replace Homo sapiens. AI is not going to erase us. And this is where Ken Wilber gets it absolutely right, because matter and consciousness are 2 poles of one great unity, the one taste, spiritual. I mean, it is, most modern scientific types assume that consciousness is a byproduct of our brains, our neural activity. People who have had, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, the shamans, the priestesses, the people who meditate a lot, know that we are conscious outside our bodies. Our consciousness is so much more than a byproduct of our brains and central nervous system. Our brains are more like transceivers for consciousness. Mm. And we are now at this cognitive level that's coming in with this postmodern era, is more and more of us are awakening to levels of consciousness that don't depend on the brain. We are much more than our bodies and our brains. You cannot put a living soul into a computer. The living consciousness, you cannot put a living soul consciousness into a computer. That comes from somewhere, from a much higher dimension of reality. There really are more than 3 dimensions. You know, the string theorists are right about that. You know, why stop at 11? My money's on 26. You know, you know. When I first heard about string theory in the 80s, early 90s, said, well, if for this all the math to be true, there would have to be 11 physical dimensions, and that can't be right. And I said, wait, this is starting to sound real to me. You know, yeah, of course there are more than 3 dimensions. I mean, just because we can't perceive them directly doesn't mean they're not there any more than the electromagnetic spectrum. Up until 200 years ago, we thought there was only the visible spectrum. Now it turns out there's this humongous electromagnetic spectrum. Well, there are more than 3 dimensions. Why should we assume that there aren't just because we can't directly perceive them? We perceive them all the time in our dreams. It's another subject. Boy, am I rambling here. The point being that the fears that AI will overtake humanity are misplaced. A lot of other fears are not misplaced. We had better become very wise very fast, because this is big stuff you're heading into. But AI is not going to replace Homo sapiens. We are going to subsume our AI into our nervous systems. We are going to be augmenting ourselves with our devices, with our AI. They will become extensions of our nervous systems. There is no limit to how fast we can evolve the next levels up, because we are no longer limited by our biological brains and nervous systems. Very soon, we are limited only by our consciousness. And as we grow in meditation and reach these higher dimensions of consciousness, we will have higher levels of wisdom, insight, compassion, and all those good Buddhist virtues pouring into us too. So we need to marry this. We need to marry the technology, as Ken Wilber said, marry Freud and the Buddha, and add the technology, right? You put them all together, oh my gosh, do we have something? I mean, I hyperventilate with excitement when I see what's possible here. So, I mean, but we really better grow our wisdom, compassion, and insight along with everything else. That's urgent.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, as you said, playing God, so to speak, is a very big moral responsibility.
Yeah.
And something that interests me a lot too is how, when we're talking about AI and everything that goes along with that, virtual reality, augmented reality, bioengineering, gene editing, Neuralink. And I think something that worries me sometimes is I really want to make sure that when these technologies fully come online, that we have the right social and political economic structures in place so that these do not get co-opted by elites or used as a kind of an insidious social Darwinism, or in a way where maybe if you're poor, you'll just die at the age of 68 and everyone else will live to 1,000 years old with their supercomputer hybrid whatever. And I think that's
the booby prize as far as I'm concerned, but please go on.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, it's so important that and externally that we have those systems and structures in place to distribute the power, so to speak, or limit it.
Yes.
But also having the inner development, the inner spiritual, moral, and values development to go along with the correlating technological and cognitive advancement too. I'm curious, from and I really value your perspective as a cultural historian, and just as a historian in general. I love to study history myself, because that's how you really gain that perspective, and to study how change happens over time. What do you think are some of the biggest impediments to us right now in our culture and society and collective consciousness? What are the impediments for developing this higher awareness that can really take us in a good place, and how do we overcome these obstacles?
We learn by doing. Trial and error. Basically, you nailed it in what you were just saying. I mean, the social, economic, political structures, that is the biggest challenge. That's the hardest part. That is the hardest part. Politics is harder than physics. And this is why I feel the passion to convey some larger sense of the context here, so that people, I mean, I see features of grave concern on the left and the right equally. I'm very, very much an integralist on this point.
Mm.
I'm kind of neither left-wing nor right-wing. I feel like I'm hovering at about 30,000 feet looking at a landscape here. Contracting in fear.
Mm.
When we contract, when we get afraid, we contract. We project. And this is where our psychological sophistication, this is where Ken Wilber's marriage of Freud and the Buddha comes in. Although, with respect, I would substitute Jung for the Buddha here. Let's marry Jung and the Buddha and our technology, a three-way marriage. Hey, why not? Mm-hmm. We are sophisticated enough with our understanding of psychology, and this is an achievement of the modern West, by the way. Ken Wilber, I think he's totally right about that. You marry that to the great wisdom of the Eastern meditative traditions. Projection. This is one of our cognitive biases. It is absolutely inbred, and this is one of the places I would tweak Ken Wilber's synthesis a bit on the understanding of projection. I would take it farther than he does. We are limited in our awareness. Once we understand that, we can adapt to it. When we are afraid, we project our own shadow selves onto the people around us. I mean, we always project. We're always projecting. This is just part of how we function psychologically as human beings. When we are afraid and we start contracting in fear, we start seeing the dark things inside of us out there. We project our shadows. This is standard jargon in psychology. When we're afraid, we look for someone to blame. We want to understand at whatever level we're operating on, whether it's one of Piaget's lower levels, medium levels, higher levels, we want to understand it with our intellects. So we start to concretize our fears and we look for somebody out there to blame it on. Blame. Projecting the blame. Those migrants flooding our southern borders are bringing in crime. You know, they're rapists and criminals, and they're carrying 75 pounds of marijuana. That's why they have calves like cantaloupes. You know, those witches, that woman, she's a black magic woman. She's going to make a devil out of me. We've got to burn her as a witch. That means, well, I'm not in control of my impulses, but I blame you. And this is that wonderful song from my youth, The Who, Behind Blue Eyes, that defines the bad guys. No one knows what it's like to be the bad man, the sad man behind blue eyes. Nobody knows what it's like to bat back their anger. No one knows what it's like to feel these feelings, and I blame you. You know, when we contract in fear, we try to understand and make sense of it, and we look for someone to blame. Blame, resentment, hatred, these keep us caught. These keep us stuck in our suffering, and then they create more suffering because we attack. Got to burn that gal as a witch. We got to separate these people from their children at the borders to discourage more people from crossing our borders. We create more suffering, right? So it's psychological at the base, but then our social political structures tend to magnify or ameliorate this. So making wise policy, to me, that is the hardest part. To learn to be wiser about our own psychological innards, be wiser about dealing with the world around us, making better policy, that is the great challenge. That is the great challenge. And if I can alleviate some people's fears, both on the left and the right, by sense, okay, you know, what's happening does make sense. This can go somewhere good. If I can alleviate some fear, that is helping remove the impediment. So I guess fear is the great impediment. Fear.
The age-old impediment to expansion, of course. And something that I think about often is, I think for a lot of individuals who are spiritually inclined or inclined to self-development and personal improvement and so forth, to do at least attempt to take the personal responsibility to reclaim their own shadow and to even be aware of the concept. I mean, I think even just being aware of the concept of the shadow, which, as we talked about,
big.
Yeah, and how a lot of these traditional spiritual religions don't have a concept of shadow.
No,
right?
They're pre-modern.
Catastrophic, right? Exactly. And something I think about is, I wonder if it's possible and how it would be possible to develop a culture, right? To create an actual cultural movement where the core feature of that movement is some notion of personal development,
Mm-hmm.
reclaiming the shadow, and
Mm-hmm.
being mindful of your projections. And of course, there's like the mindfulness movement
Yes.
right now that's really been taking off. And one of the things I have found very interesting was that the mindfulness movement has kind of dovetailed with the social justice movement. And
Yes.
a lot of people in very green, postmodern Portland, like nonprofit environments who are into social justice, they throw the mindfulness thing in. I'm like, where did that come from, man? That was left field, but that's great. That's cool, right? Bring that upper left quadrant element of consciousness, interiority, and personal responsibility back online to
Yeah.
complement external activism.
Yes.
And I'm just curious, like, what do you think about how we could, as at least in the U.S., develop a cultural movement that would include personal, integral insights into personal development and psychology and shadow work?
Well, rather than do that one top down, I would my approach is to look at what's already happening
Hmm.
and see what we want to bring in and reinforce and where we want to connect some things.
Yes.
Definitely the whole integral movement, Ken Wilber and others. And here I want to plug that book by Ken Wilber and three others, Integral Life Practice.
Mm-hmm.
Is very much about what you were saying personally, how we can each set up a lifestyle for ourselves where we are growing at all the levels. And that includes a very practical, hands-on way to deal with your own shadow work, which I have adopted, by the way. This is so my sense is, Ken, he's trying to do this top down with the group around, the whole integral group around him.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very powerful, but there's so many places where this is arising. I mean, the many green shoots all over the place. So my sense is more, let's see which one I want to join and water and fertilize and join. But my sense also is to look at the landscape and see, oh, look, if I take that over there and connect it with that over there and put them together, we've got a force multiplier.
Mm-hmm.
So my sense is to look at what's already existing, look at what calls to me specifically, what calls to you specifically. You may be drawn to a different particular thing that you're doing, and you are. I mean, what you're doing with your farm, I'd love to hear more about it sometime, by the way. Maybe somebody could interview Ryan.
I don't have anything to say. I'm just a lonely talking with Teal interviewer.
But there's a part of what I seem to do in my life is see pieces that are lying around on the landscape doing their own thing happily, but if you bring them together, they're force multipliers for each other. But then I also just kind of watch, how does this garden want to grow? Rather than predetermining what to plant in it, let's look at this garden. Let's look at this patch of ground. What's its what do you say, pH factor, acid, base? What's the kind of soil, sandy, clay, a lot of humus? How do we need, what wants to grow here? And then plant what is best suited there, what is an optimum amount of watering, not watering, sun, shade. I mean, there are a lot of things we can do to it, but it has its own the ground has its own innate nature that we want to work with. So first, kind of look at what's already arising. How does this garden want to grow? What wants to grow here? How does it want to grow? How can we encourage that and nourish it? So
Right. A very organic approach,
Yeah, I thought you might like that.
Yes, absolutely. Seeing what's fertile and helping it to ripen into something. Just for your own life, what has been ripe for you now, and how have you been applying this philosophy in existing institutions or movements or people around you?
Well, specifically, when Trump sailed down that escalator, I'm going to go back there. Mm-hmm. I kind of looked around and said, I have spent my life up till now basically cultivating my own garden. This is like Voltaire's Candide. I really pulled back from involvement in the outer world. I've been taking care of the people around me and, following my own interests and doing volunteer work. I have cheerfully left social activism to other people. So it's great. I'm glad y'all are doing it. Go for it. I mean, I'm just doing my own thing here, but that changed me. And then in the wake of the 2016 election, I thought, I have to be more a part of the social action, just for my own personal sense of balance. I felt like, other people have come up with this. I felt like young men when World War II broke out, a lot of men volunteered for the armed forces who didn't have to go, because they said this Nazism is one of the greatest evils that has ever existed on this planet. I have to be part of dealing with it. Whatever this does to my life, I have to be part of this. And so what I did, not nearly as heroic as going off and joining the military to go fight Hitler or anything, but I rejoined the church of my childhood, Unitarian Universalist, because they do social activism. I don't have to invent any wheels here. Just go see. I wandered up the hill in Berkeley, where there's a really wonderful church, and where they've been doing lots of wonderful social activism. And I've joined it and gotten very active with them and found a wonderful community that has greatly enriched my life. So now it's kind of like a rebalancing of Ken Wilber's 4 quadrants. So seeking that balance, I've added a little bit of social activism, and I've ended up actually being more active in other parts of the church. But as part of that community, we are supporting the social activism, which is a beating heart. I mean, we're part of the sanctuary movement that helps people, who are at risk of being deported. Mm-hmm. We're doing work in the Richmond inner city with one of the Muslim mosques there, church interfaith things, all sorts of really beautiful social activism. In fact, one of our ministers was just down at San Diego with a lot of other ministers protesting the wall that Trump built. Very proud of her. So I've upped that, so rebalancing that and rejoining that. But then I'm finding, having Ken Wilber's perspective on green, that postmodern level, where you can speak truth to power. Boy, can we speak truth to power at that postmodern level. We're not very good at wielding power. Mm-hmm. Not very good at getting things done. We can protest and say, this is bad, this is wrong, this is evil. And here's where that projection comes in, where I feel, and not so much anymore, but where social activism where I felt like I didn't want to deal with this, was the kind of fingernails on the chalkboard: rage, blame, resentment, judgment. You're wrong, you're evil, you just, and this is like, again, as long as we're coming out from resentment, blame, judgment, and anger, we are doing more harm than good. The Buddhists have a lot to say about this. The Buddha, this is a quote from the Buddha: hatred has not at any time ceased by hatred. By love alone does hatred cease. This is the ancient and eternal law. And so that churning anger that I see in so many wonderful social activists, that kind of drove me away from it in my youth. We have ways to address this, and this is where the shadow work and the next level up. So many of these wonderful social warriors who have done so much good, they burn out. They're not comfortable in their skins. The distress. I mean, there's healing. We can come at our social activism from a place of joy and caring and compassion, and have much more energy because we don't burn out, and have more insight and have more compassion because we are able to put ourselves in the other person's shoes instead of just judging them. Oh, automatically, you're wrong by definition. And we can actually start to feel into them. And this is the kind of insight that you can get at the higher stages of meditation, where you are conscious through intuition, the intuition that transcends rationality, where we start to open into the Buddha's radical insight that we do not exist as separate beings. We have never existed as separate beings. This separateness is an illusion, a temporary illusion, and the spirit in us, the pure consciousness, starts to be blossom at that level where we are already one and we intuit the other person. We feel them as if we feel ourselves without violating any boundaries, because we don't have to cross a boundary. We don't have to penetrate a boundary to get into somebody else's head. You know, we are getting something from that level at which we have always been one, and we realize we are one. If I judge you, I'm judging myself. I have never, every time we are judging another person, we're really judging ourselves. And when you start to see and actually understand those mechanisms, that every judgment I make is really a judgment on me. Oh my goodness. Oh my, I had that in me. Wow. And at that point, it's not just a good idea. It's that the judgment starts to fall away. And Ken Wilber has a lot to say about this too, and many spiritual teachers, where the judgment just naturally falls away and the compassion is just like breathing. And you see where the other person is hurting. You see where there is a deep need that's not being met. And this is nonviolent communication, which I want to put in a big plug for. That just bypasses all the mental blah, blah, and goes right to where the other person is in urgent need of something and sees that and tries to find a way where everybody's needs can be met. And this can be done with joy. And you don't burn out. It's from a sense that second tier, I'm using integral jargon here, that second tier comes from plenty, not from a sense of lack. As we move into this next era, we will have a sense of abundance at every level instead of, and this is one of the great changes of this new turning to the second tier. We will have abundant energy, and we will learn to care for ourselves when we need to renew ourselves, and that's part of the balance. And I've had to learn in an aging body, you know, when to pull back and let myself renew. I've really rambled here, but these stages of maturity, of cognitive and spiritual and psychological maturity, we can bring this to that social activism, these brave, noble people who have been fighting for social justice all along, and some of them are so burnt out, and now they're facing Trump and all these new horrors, and just like, we don't have to do this from a place of anger and judgment and blame and resentment. We can do this from love, compassion, and constantly renewing energy. So,
sounds so much more fun. Yeah, the way you frame it, it almost sounds like being an activist. It almost has a spiritually nourishing quality to it. It goes out and then it comes back to you.
Yes. It's a metabolism. It's like the beating of a heart, systole and diastole, flub dub. Some flows in, some flows out. And to have a living system, you need inflow, outflow, in-breath, out-breath. You go beyond, and there's a beautiful quote by Maulana Rumi, who usually gets the last word. Out beyond our ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there.
Yeah, I love that quote.
We can come to our spiritual activism from that.
Right. Yeah, I've always thought, what would be a good name to encapsulate this kind of new act? I was always thinking about like holistic activism or something that would imply that the process of being an activist and work in the world is not only to just wave a fist to power and to try to fight these horrendous, egregious injustices of oppression and violence and so forth, but also include within it some notion of personal development as well, that by being able to evolve my consciousness and myself and become a further instantiation of beauty, truth, and goodness, I'm actually a more effective activist, right? By developing my own consciousness, by developing my compassion and empathy to others.
And your joy. And joy.
Absolutely. And that's what's really infectious. That's what makes it contagious, right? And it's interesting because if I'm grateful for anything about Trump, it's how many people he's inspired to, kind of like your story, right?
Yes.
Engaging the world, yeah.
He's pushing it forward. He's a catalyst. He's a powerful catalyst. And he's fulfilling that just the way I saw in that story that fell on me 28 years ago. The bad guy who engineers my heroine's horrific death as a human sacrifice ends up slinging the whole region farther forward into the new era of farming than if he'd never been the bad guy. He ends up pushing things, and that landed on me 20. And I see the same thing happening with Trump. Like you just said, so many people have stuck and said, wait, I'm not going to stay in my old comfortable ruts. I've got to put my shoulder to some wheel here and help move things forward. He's a catalyst.
Right. Yeah. And I think he's catalyzing kind of in a negative way. And on the other pole, I've seen Bernie's, like a lot of my spiritual friends and my yoga friends in Hawaii, because when in the 2015 primary, I was still in Hawaii, but so many of my friends who were mostly inward contemplative people, just interested in their own spiritual work, they got into politics through Bernie Sanders in a more inspirational kind of like, they had some hope and some interest in society. So he pulled them into the scene in kind of like a happy way. Trump was kind of like oh crap, you know, something. But either way, I mean, I'll take either one just to balance that out. I prefer Bernie.
They balance each other, don't they?
But creating this kind of new movement, this new container of activism. I'm curious on the ground here, you know, being a part of this church that's doing all these wonderful things. But still, of course, you'll meet a lot of people who really do have that white hot anger, and it may not be the most sustainable or even effective form of activism and social change. Do you find yourself able to influence that or kind of push them in a different direction at all? Do you have?
I don't try to push people anymore. It doesn't work.
I know what you mean.
I just offer you kind of. It's not even that I offer alternatives. It's that I am in my space. And if people are interested, like, I mean, here you are, you've enlisted me for this wonderful interview. And if people are interested in talking about something, I'll talk about it. If they, basically, if they put the quarter in, I'll play the record. And I'm finding that what I'm getting is these beautiful individual connections with individuals, some of whom are really hurting and therefore rather prickly. But if I am at peace in myself, then I don't respond with prickliness to their prickliness. And that can lead interesting places. As opportunities open and I see them, I take them. I work very hard at my writing. I choose what outwardly to get involved with, respecting my own limits of time and energy. But I try not to push anything anymore at all, because that's kind of like a violation of the other person's free will. I will offer, say, have you considered such and such? If they don't want to hear it, I drop it.
Yeah. I
find I get a lot farther, a lot faster that way, just by really being peace. I mean, like Thich Nhat Hanh, that wonderful Vietnamese Buddhist. I mean, not that I'm there. I mean, I'm nowhere near him. But when I'm in my center, people open to me. When I'm out there trying to push something, they're defending themselves. I get a lot further by just being mindful, here in myself now, with them, open to them, aware. I mean, here's where it can get very challenging sometimes, but when this is the shadow work that Ken Wilber, a lot of other people have helped with my shadow work, but aware of what's rising in me. Wow, look at that rising. Wow, that really stung. 5 minutes later, wow, I'm thinking about how that stung. A day later, wow, that thing she said to me really stung. Well, let's look at that. What's coming up in me? Work on it through myself. And then if I decide I have the time and interest, the next time I cross paths with that person, I'm there listening for their pain. I'm looking for their pain. I mean, here's an orienting guideline for my life. When somebody's behavior hurts me, they are in pain, I guarantee. First of all, this is nonviolent community. First of all, look at my own reaction. So I don't I'm not suppressing it. I'm not pretending it's not there. I am allowing it to rise like the clouds arise in the sky and then pass, and then interact with the other from a calmer place, but own my own reaction. Pain, just anger, just that pissed me off, whatever. Okay, there it is. And that can be a huge cue. I mean, even without the intuition, just from a place of logical intellect. If this person triggered something in me, that's a clue to what's roiling in them. And then I can approach, if I've worked it through on my own inside myself, if I've worked out my own stuff, then I can approach them out of intellectual curiosity, or compassion. And kind of be aware, wow, this person has a merciless inner self-judge. This person is constantly criticizing herself with everything she does. This person is in pain all the time. But look how much hard work she's doing. I mean, she's running this newsletter, she's doing, but she is in pain all the time. And then I can be interacting with this particular individual human being from a place of calmness, my own centeredness, and compassion. And, when it's working, it's magical. It doesn't always work, but when it works, it's magic. And then as openings happen there, that can lead to other things. So no, I really make a point of not trying to push things. I watch for opportunities.
Yeah, your presence, I think, alone is very beneficial, and people can feel that when you're centered in yourself and you're emanating a attitude of openness and humility and welcoming. And I think
it isn't always there, by the way.
Right? Something to aspire towards. But I love how you describe that process of compassion, because not only does that make someone feel better or elicit a compassionate response from our hearts to other people, but to be aware that that person is probably suffering also. It's just true. I mean, that's just objectively true. You're looking at the situation realistically and clearly,
Yeah, well, that was the Buddhist's first noble truth. The 4 noble truths that are the foundation of Buddhism. The first noble truth, there is suffering.
Right. Life is dukkha. Life is suffering.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, just to give another plug here to the integral model and why it's been, I think, so helpful for both of us as an orienting framework, is I've seen, for example, in some Buddhist type of activist circles or other circles that ostensibly include some kind of spiritual or meditative component, that their inner spiritual life and personal development tends to be siloed off from their outer activist work. So it's like, when I'm on the street, I'm going to be any other angry liberal.
I love that.
And then I'm going to go home to the meditation cushion and do the nice stuff and meditate and do my Dharma practice there. And I was saying, like, where's the confluency between the two? I'm seeing like one here in this box and this is in this box. And the integral model is like, it really is about integrating them in both contexts, right? I mean, and we break down these hard and fast lines between traditionally very different paths of outer social change and inner spiritual development. And we get to marry the two. It's such a beautiful framework to have.
Yes, it is. And some of the contemporary Western Buddhists leaders who are also psychotherapists, Salzburg and Cornfield, Jack Cornfield, A Path to His Heart. I want to plug that. It's the best book on meditation and spirituality I've ever read. But you join the two where there isn't a hard and fast boundary between our outer lives in the world and our families and relationships and our inner life of personal inner development. No, our lives are our practice. And our practice is our life.
Yes.
It's all one mesh, beautiful mesh. It's a beautiful web, a jeweled web.
Right. Now, before we start getting wrapped up here, I'll have to get your thoughts on the coming, since we're talking about politics and social issues, about the 2020 election. And it seemed, as someone commented, even my cat is running for president in 2020. And it seems like everyone is throwing their hat into the race. I think even Marianne Williamson is running for president. And I'm just like, wow, okay, there's a lot of people running. I'm doing a lot of research. I already know who I'm voting for, Andrew Yang, but at least in the primary. But I'm just curious, not only in terms of who wins or what policies you may be for, but just what are you hoping to see? Just any hopes, dreams, fears, concerns? What do you?
Oh, really? I had not thought at all about the 2020 election. I tend to look at big pictures. I'm following current events because they're research for my novel, because that way I don't have to invent the politics in the last third of my novel. All I have to do is mine, kind of take what's happening here. I would like to see sanity restored. I would like to see a president who picks up the old decencies and moves forward to new policies. Our democratic system's been hacked. I mean, let's face it. I mean, Putin hacked it. I'm going to back up a bit, take a larger context. So many weird things had to happen to put Trump in the Oval Office that I have accepted this is the will of God. I mean, so many different things happened. I mean, he wouldn't be there without Fox News and Roger Ailes. He wouldn't be there without Putin hacking the elections. He wouldn't be there without the McConnell and, I mean, you can go on and on. So, okay, this is what's happening now. Our democratic system has been hacked by a hostile foreign power and by some hostile inner domestic powers. It's kind of like we are a very large firm who's had their database hacked into. Our new AI and our new computer, the internet, social media, all of this new stuff, these new technologies. I mean, we've been hacked. So I'm thinking of like a multi-celled organism that's just starting to kind of evolve a backbone and like separate organs, and like, wait a minute, we need an endocrine system, and how about that? And you know what? We need an antibody system, and we need some new systems. We need a major upgrade of our systems to protect our form of democracy, and maybe we need to make some new systems. But I mean, first of all, I want to see a president who's decent. I'm kind of a centrist politically myself. I don't care whether they're left or right of center, but who will rebuild the systems that were broken. I mean, Putin may have done us a favor showing us where we need to adapt our whole electoral systems and policies to account for, hackers, social media, trolls who flood Facebook and Twitter with messages. That would be a concrete hope that I would have. And mostly, I would like to see decency restored.
Mm.
It's like, gosh.
Yes, amen.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Karen, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you and have you on, and I'd love to do this with you again sometime.
Oh, delightful.
Just before we close up here, is there anything else you wanted to tell us about, anything we missed out, anything about your book or anything?
No, well, okay, I'll put in a plug since you've offered me the opportunity. I do hope in the next few months to half year to be starting my blog, which will be my heroine, Mbe, shaman priestess from 10,000 years ago, and my imaginary BFF. And she will be making snarky comments about current events from her Stone Age point of view. And she's uninhibited and a lot of fun. So I will hopefully, let me ask this. You said you were going to post this interview now on Facebook at some point?
Yeah, I was going to upload it on YouTube as a platform.
YouTube, yeah. If I can get my website and blog, this is really a synchronicity for me, is I can get on top of that technology. And then on my embryonic professional website, I can kind of post a link to this blog. So I'm hoping to get kind of all that up so that people can hear Mbe's snarky opinions about current events and maybe read little bits and pieces. And I also have some short pieces that go into further detail about some of the stuff we talked into, my visions for the future, and how I had that past life recall that led to the novel. These are short pieces that will be available on my website soon, I hope.
Awesome. Yeah. Let us know when that's up, and then I will include the link to your website and blog on the video so everyone can go to that and check it out and follow you. Well, thank you so much. And yeah, I'd love to do this again, and I really look forward to reading your book when it comes out.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Namaste.
Namaste.